Hi, welcome to the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. Today I will be talking about seasonal foraging of edible invasive plant species. So first off, a little introduction. My name is Sarah d'Apollonia and I have a small business called East Coast Wild Foods here in Nova Scotia. I founded this company in 2016, and basically what we do is we forage for wild food from the natural environment. So that could be anything from different types of edible seaweed to edible berries, plants, flowers, mushrooms. There's lots out there in the wild that you can eat. And these products are supplied to restaurants, breweries, distilleries. Do little pop-ups and workshops as well, just teaching about education and awareness of all of these wild foods that you can find here in Nova Scotia. Eat the weeds. So here we're going to be talking about three types of weeds that are very common here in Nova Scotia. They are all very invasive, so that goes in line with the presentations this week. And they're also all edible. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Japanese knotweed. And this is a highly invasive species in Nova Scotia. You're probably familiar with it. You've probably seen it along the roadsides or in gardens or parks. It's pretty much everywhere that you look. We are also going to look at goutweed or ground elder. This is also a very invasive species. It's often planted for ornamental purposes, but it quickly takes over and just crowds out any other plant, and also very invasive but edible. And finally, we're going to look at the dandelion, which I'm sure you're also all familiar with. So the dandelion is, again, a very invasive species, and it is also edible. All right, the first species we're going to look at is Japanese knotweed. And as I mentioned before, this is one of the most invasive species in the world. So it's actually listed on the list of 100 of the world's worst invasive species. And this plant completely takes over landscapes. It was native to Japan in Asia, but it was introduced to North America as an ornamental, and it has quickly escaped from its ornamental constraints. So it's kind of like a shrub-like perennial plant, and it can reach heights of several meters. You can see in the lower picture there, it's just formed a huge, basically, wall of plant material, and it quickly establishes itself and very invasive, and it spreads through the rhizomes or through any vegetative cuttings. So even a portion of the stem or a portion of the roots will take hold and will spread very rapidly. But luckily for us, it is also edible, and it has some medicinal uses as well. So, concerning the edibility of Japanese knotweed, it is a spring wild edible, so you want to harvest it when it is just emerging from the ground. So that's in the early spring here in Nova Scotia. It's the perfect time to harvest it this year, about the middle of May. And you only want to harvest about the first 6 inches of the emerging shoots, and no more than 1 foot in height, because they start to get kind of woody and stringy and a bit tough in texture, so they really become unpalatable. You also want to be aware of where you are harvesting Japanese knotweed. Because it is so invasive, it's often subjected to really potent herbicides. And also because it grows in kind of desolate places, roadsides, or abandoned lots and so forth, it can be contaminated with a lot of environmental pollutants. So you definitely want to know the surrounding environment that you're harvesting from. Concerning the taste of Japanese knotweed, well, it tastes similar to rhubarb, but with more vegetative taste to it. So it has a bit of a more green or earthy flavor to it, but it does have the oxalic acid, so it's got that sourness that rhubarb has. So there's lots of different uses for Japanese knotweed in the kitchen. For example, you can eat it raw. It's got that sourness taste I described earlier. You can also cook with it. You could saute it sort of in an Asian style with different types of soy sauce or sake or sesame or something. You can also pickle it. It makes really fabulous pickles because it's got some nice sour notes to it. Another great way to enjoy Japanese knotweed is you cook it down first as if you were making a jam. So you would cook it, chop it up and cook it and add some sugar and then puree it. This way you can also freeze it quite easily and then use it as you want throughout the year. Just pull out the frozen puree, defrost it, and use it in your recipe. So you could use that in different baked goods. You can make ice cream or sorbet. You can make it into jams or jellies as a rhubarb substitute. And I've also seen some people making wine or liquor or shrubs out of Japanese knotweed. And that would just be extracting that sour taste from the plant and infusing that into different types of liquor. Another use for Japanese knotweed is its medicinal benefits. So I'm not too familiar about this, but I do know that the root is used to treat Lyme's disease. So if that is something that you're interested in, then please do consult with a registered herbalist that would know more about the medicinal purposes of Japanese knotweed. The second plant that we're going to speak about today is goutweed or ground elder, also called bishop's weed. So this is a plant that is native to Europe, but it was introduced and is now naturalized in North America. It's a small perennial ground cover plant, so you'll often see this in gardens or parks or the side of paths, side of roadways. It's quite invasive and it quickly establishes itself in any environment. And it also spreads through vegetative reproduction. So that's any little bit of stem or root or rhizome can lead on to reproduce in the environment. So that's why it spreads so quickly and so readily. Luckily, it's also got some medicinal uses and it is also edible. Goutweed is another spring vegetable that you can harvest. It's best harvested just when the leaves are starting to emerge from the ground, so they're just starting to be poking up and unfurling. And again, in mid-May here in Nova Scotia, it's the perfect time to harvest goutweed. You want to be aware of what you're harvesting. This is the rule for any plant or any mushroom or anything that you're picking from the wild, especially with goutweed because it does have a toxic, very toxic look-alike, which is poison hemlock. There's many different characteristics that you can pay attention to, small details that distinguish these two plants. But one of them, especially when you're harvesting the leaves and the young leaves, is the tooth margins. So you can see in that lower picture there, the leaf veins of goutweed terminate at the tip of the leaf tooth. So you can see the vein is just reaching out from the main portion of the leaf and it finishes right at the tip of a tooth. Whereas in the toxic hemlock, the leaf veins will terminate between the teeth. So that is one determining characteristic to identify the differences in the leaves of these two plants, one being very toxic and the other being edible and also medicinal. The young leaves, they can be eaten fresh just as they are. They're very aromatic and tender when you get them when they're young. They've kind of have a taste similar to celery and parsley, so they can be added to salads. I wouldn't make a salad of only goutweed because it's quite potent, but you can also cook or bake with them as well. So as I mentioned earlier, you can eat goutweed raw just as it is, and you might want to just add that to a salad or as a garnish because it does have almost like that spicy flavor as does celery. You can cook with goutweed. You can substitute it as a spinach, so you could make any kind of like rolls or spanakoppitas with goutweed. You can puree it into soups. It's popular in Germany as a green soup in early spring. You can also infuse it into different types of spreads or pesto or any kind of savory dishes and savory baked goods. And as I mentioned, it's also got a medicinal use. So all parts of the plant are diuretic, and the name goutweed kind of implies its medicinal use. So it was traditionally used to treat gout, also used to treat rheumatism, arthritis, and bladder disorders as well. But if you're looking at any medicinal uses of this plant, then please do consult with a registered herbalist about all these different medicinal applications. Here is a video of myself harvesting some Japanese knotweed and goutweed. So we can watch this video here. All right, so here we have some goutweed or ground elder growing in with some Japanese knotweed. So you can just see these shoots starting to emerge, and eventually we're going to form this huge mass of very invasive weeds. So it's pretty wild to imagine that these little guys will turn into these shrubs that just completely take over, several meters high, extremely invasive.
So to harvest Japanese knotweed, we're about mid-May here in Nova Scotia, and now is the perfect time to harvest them. You want to get them, they're just a few inches tall, so I generally harvest no more than 1 foot in height because they start getting stringy and tough and just kind of like unpalatable. So to harvest these, basically just slice them off ground level. And you can see that there's already stringy bits on the outside, so they're hollow stem, and you just get the first couple inches there. They're going to be more tender. There's another young tip. One over here. I'm just slicing it off right at ground level. With Japanese knotweed, because it is so invasive, you can really take as much as you need. So no rules on leaving, a certain percentage of the plant. Just take as much as you can in this case. We also have some ground elder or goutweed, also very invasive, the gardener's bane. And this one you just want to take the top of the leaves that are just starting to unfurl. They're nice and tender, very aromatic, so you just use a few fresh in salads. You can also cook with goutweed or ground elder. It's really nice. Kind of has like a celery flavor to it. So you just kind of tip off the ends of the leaves, the fresh unfurling bits. And there you go.
The third species that we're going to look at today is the dandelion. I'm sure you're all familiar with the dandelion. This is one of the most versatile edible weeds out there. It's native to Europe, and it's not technically considered an invasive species, but it certainly is a nuisance, and it does invade a lot of different habitats. So the dandelion has asexual reproduction from seed, so meaning that any seed from the one dandelion flower will go on to reproduce and make subsequent dandelions. So that's why you often see them in big colonies. They're technically clones of the mother plant. And all parts are edible, and they also have some medicinal uses as well. So as I mentioned earlier, all parts of the dandelion are edible. You can eat the leaves, and it's a spring green. You can eat the flower buds, so that's just before the flower has actually developed. You can eat the flowers as well, and even the roots are edible. A few different uses of dandelion. Well, first you can just eat the leaves raw. They're a little bit bitter. If you get them when they're young and the first leaves that have emerged, they're not as bitter, but they're really nice just as a salad addition. You can also saute them, as you would spinach. So cook the leaves. You can pickle the flower buds. That's a really cool way to enjoy them all year long. So you would just do them in sort of like a pickle or type of brine and just let them sit in that brine. And then you have these almost like spicy, bitter kind of capers. You can use the flowers for making dandelion wine, shrubs, or spirits. And the roots are also used as a coffee substitute. So you can even find roasted dandelion root tea in a lot of different shops, in herbal shops, and different places that sell medicinal tea and herbal tea. So just a few things to keep in mind if you're out there foraging, harvesting your food from the wilds. If you are harvesting on private land, you definitely want to ask for permission beforehand. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to know what you're harvesting as well as the surrounding area or habitat, just in case there would be any environmental pollutions or herbicides that were applied in the area. And if you don't know what a plant or mushroom is, definitely ask someone before picking it. And definitely be sure of what you are picking before you eat it. And normally there's some etiquette when you're harvesting wild food. You want to leave, a certain portion of the plants there in the wild to go on and propagate. But really in this case, because all three of these species that we looked at today are so invasive, I personally don't think these rules apply. So, harvest as much as you want of Japanese knotweed, goutweed, and dandelions. I really love harvesting wild food because it's a great way to get outside and to learn about your habitat and what grows around you and get in tune with the seasons and everything. It's really fun. You can just go out by yourself and use foraging as a kind of meditative way of connecting to nature. You can also go with friends and family, and it's just so much fun to go out with a basket and come home with a basket full of food and cook up the things that you found in the wild. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and if you do have any questions, then please do feel free to get in touch. I'm available online, eastcoastwildfoods.com. I'm also on social media, Facebook, Instagram. So if you do have any questions or comments, then do reach out. Thanks.